our NFL news and notes with John McMullen. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. You can send us a text message at 609-403-0973. And, John, it was this time yesterday that we were talking about Michael Bennett getting traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. And as you write at 973ESPN.com, this move is really showing that this is part of the new norm, that this was what they were talking about, which meant they're going to go out there and continue to upgrade the team whenever possible, and not just by saying it. They're going out and showing you by bringing in. You could make an argument, John, that Bennett is a better player than Graham.
Yeah, you can make that argument. Certainly at the height of his career, he was a better player than Brandon Graham. And they're very similar, and that tells you how good he was. Now, he is 32. He's going to be 33 in November. He still played very well last season. I think the fact that he's in Philadelphia will help him for the reason that Jim Schwartz is going to give him a more of a blow. He played a lot of snaps in Seattle. They didn't have as much depth on the defensive line, so I think that will help him. But, I mean, when you have both of those players, and the Eagles are going to have both of them, and the versatility, the ability to move them around, they could both essentially play 3 of the 4 positions the Eagles use on the defensive line. That's tough to deal with because you can start picking out mismatches on opposing offensive lines. And, look, on paper, it just looks almost unstoppable when they put their best 4 pass rushers on the field. We'll see if it works out that way. A lot of times in sports, we see high-profile pickups, and it doesn't really translate and end up that way. But on paper, it's tough to look at this and say it's not a home run for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yesterday, John Clayton told us that Bennett was one of the most intelligent defensive lineman in the league. He said his versatility, and he was quite frankly kind of scared about how the Eagles would end up using him. How are some of the ways that you anticipate him fitting in with this current roster?
Well, the easiest thing would just to slot him into the Vinny Curry role, which would be to start him at right defensive end. And then you kind of figure out who's better at what, because his effectiveness as a pass rusher, and I think maybe the most impressive thing, but it's not sexy, is Bennett is tremendous against the run as well. You rarely see that, but his ability to rush the passer from the interior is tremendous, probably even better than Brandon Graham. So ultimately, I would like to slot him in that role where he goes inside on obvious passing downs and keep Brandon on the outside. But Jim will work through that and figure out who does what best. But the beauty is, as I said, maybe Brandon has a better matchup on a certain week against a certain player, or maybe Michael does, and he can move them whenever he wants. They can both play either end spot, and they can both play under tackle inside. So it really is. We use that term. We've used it a lot with the quarterback position. This is another embarrassment of riches for the Philadelphia Eagles.
John, we've heard about Michael Bennett being one of the NFL's most notably outspoken players. Did you see the title of his book that's coming out next month? You stand by the belief that, that he's going to assimilate okay to the Eagles locker room and not be outspoken and controversial?
Well, I'm scared of the title of this book. Did you get that joke, Pete?
Yes, I did. You're uncomfortable by the title of the book.
I'm comfortable. I'm sorry. You're right. Look, he's one of the things about the Eagles is they have a very strong locker room, and it starts with Malcolm Jenkins and people like Chris Long and others. I think they look at that stuff and kind of snicker. We saw, when the Eagles made the trade for Jay Ajayi, Adam Gase basically threw him under the bus when he was leaving South Florida. everything coming out of Miami. Terrible teammate, awful guy. He gets to Philadelphia, no issues whatsoever, which I think said a lot about Adam Gase as a head coach. But beyond that, he fit in, and he wasn't an issue. And Doug kind of brushes all that off. He doesn't like compliments. Wrote that at 973ESPN.com. But I think it starts with him. He's a big part of that. The fact that he played 14 years in this league, I think he has the pulse on the locker room. And I don't think he worries about that stuff. And now, winning cures a lot of ills, and that's what he says. When you're winning,
but this is a guy who has won.
Don't complain.
This is a guy who has, won in the past.
Oh, sure. And I get a kick out of it because I had people on Twitter saying what a bad guy he was. See, even Seattle couldn't control him. I said Seattle won a Super Bowl with him. He was the best defensive lineman on the best defense of this generation. And they were a yard away from another Super Bowl. And he made the Pro Bowl 3 times. Seattle did just fine with him. All that kind of stuff is just white noise, and that's how the Eagles look at it.
And then your point that you had the article about Doug Peterson putting the percentage on the players, I thought that was a telling quote too. Maybe you could tell our listeners how Doug breaks that down, what the league's all about.
That was back at the Super Bowl, and Mike might remember when we had Adam Kaplan on, and he kind of said the difference between Chip Kelly and Doug Peterson was that Chip thought this was a coaching league, and Doug knows it's a players league, and it is a players league. And Doug, a little bit of an exaggeration, but said it's 98% the players and the talent and 2% coaching. But that 2%'s got to be 100%. So he's not a mathematician. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but you kind of get where he's going. The fact that you need talent to win in this league, but you have to coach it well. And the Eagles obviously have proven they can do that.
What do you think Vinny Curry's reaction was to this news yesterday, and does this strengthen or weaken the Eagles' position to move Curry if they want to?
Well, obviously, it's certainly he's not going to be happy because it's a clear indication he's not going to be back. But Vinny was smart enough to know he was not going to be back at his scheduled salary anyway, so something was going to have to be done. As far as trading him, I don't think it changes things dramatically from the perspective of, yes, people know the Eagles want to trade Vinny Curry now. The thought of a restructure is likely out the window. But it's not like they were going to get significant compensation for him with that contract to begin with. So you're talking maybe a 7th-round pick, maybe a condition on it to begin with. And from that standpoint, if you're a team that needs pass rush help and Vinny can get to the passer, you might think to yourself, well, yeah, the Eagles are going to cut him, but then you got to fight with 31 other teams that might want him. Because Vinny Curry on the street, without that contract, he's going to have a lot of interest. So if you're a team that likes Vinny Curry, there's no guarantee you're going to get him if you wait for the Eagles to release him. So that's where the trade aspect comes in.
Hey, John, you write about the fact that this is this trade for Bennett is a symbol for the new norm in Philadelphia. Do you think Howie Roseman's done making these type of moves for this offseason? Do you think he's going to try to find more high-profile guys? And a follow-up to that would be, how likely do you think it is that Roseman goes to Dallas with the draft in Dallas without a 2nd and 3rd round pick?
Well, he might go there, but I think by the time we're in day 2, he's going to have a 2nd or 3rd round pick. I don't think there's any way the Eagles are going to pick at 32 and then wait around to the 4th round. That's just not his nature. He likes to make moves. He likes to we've seen it time and time again. As far as, I think maybe the most overrated thing in the NFL, and we constantly talk about it, and we're guilty about it as well. But Howie does it time and time again. We're always talking about the Eagles are up against it from a salary cap standpoint, and he makes moves, and he's able to bring in a high-profile player. So, I think the conventional thinking is, well, you're $10 million over the cap. The league year starts on next Wednesday. There's no way you can bring in anybody of any substance. And then he gets a 3-time Pro Bowler with a Super Bowl ring. So when I say, do I think he's going to bring in any more high-profile people? No. But would it shock me? Not at all, especially at the wide receiver position. I think they might try to make a splash. But understand, there's going to be a lot of moves, whether it's trades, whether it's restructures, whether it's extensions, because this team is over the cap and they've got to do some things.
John, yesterday when the Bennett move was made, I saw some people out there saying, well, this signals that Howie is going for it and they're trying to go for back-to-back. And then the question got put out there, what's the better philosophy? Should the Eagles go for it or should they build for the future? How would you answer that?
No, you go for it because the championship window is open, and the championship window is open largely because the Eagles are in the best-case scenario when it comes to roster building and the fact that they hit on a quarterback in the draft. So we all understand when Carson Wentz gets to his second contract, well, you're talking $25 million a year, and that's if you're lucky. And all of a sudden, when you get into that position, the reality is the back end of your roster is going to take a hit. That's just what happens in the NFL. When you pay a quarterback that much money, it's got to come from somewhere. So the window is open to build the strongest roster possible while you still have the star quarterback on his rookie deal. But that window is going to be closing very, very soon. So this is the time where you should be seizing the day. This is the time where you should be going for it.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. Let's talk about free agency a little bit because it starts on Wednesday, a week from yesterday. You wrote about an area or some spots that the Eagles should take a look at in free agency. We talked yesterday about you make the trade for Bennett, you give up the 5th. You had 2 5ths. You give up the 5th because this draft is essentially a depth draft. You're not looking for starters to replace guys. You're just looking at, I would guess, for, depth, special teams, that kind of stuff. So you could afford to give up the 5th. It's almost, I'm not saying this draft is a throwaway, but you're just drafting basically to find some depth because you're drafting so deep. You don't have that 2nd and 3rd. But where do you think they look in free agency, which comes before the draft?
Yeah, Doug admitted, it was asked in Indianapolis at the scouting combine where the Eagles need to get better. Well, they have so many of their starters back. They just added a high-level starter. You're right. There's not a lot of places they need to get better. They need a tight end. They need a receiver. They need to continue to build up the skill positions. But other than that, it's a really deep team. It's a really good team. And Doug admitted, though, they did not play as well on special teams as they've had in the past. I think a lot of that had to do with injuries. Darren Sproles as a returner, obviously devastating. Chris Maragos, one of the best coverage players in this league. And if you go back to that 2014 season, that's when the Eagles sort of proved they were ahead of the curve when it came to special teams. And ever since Dave Phipp has been here, they've generally had one of the best special teams units in the league. And that's because they identified Maragos, they identified Brian Bremen at the time, a couple other players. Nolan Carroll was one of them. Darren Sproles as a returner was one of them. That excelled on special teams. Very few organizations do that. They just rely on, well, you're the backup linebacker, so go out there and play special teams. You're the backup tight end, go out there and play special teams. You're the fifth wide receiver. Go cover a kick. Well, some of those guys aren't very good at that. And the Eagles have always used roster spots for guys who only play special teams. I mean, to be honest, that's all Brian Brayman does. And really, that's all Chris does.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important part of this game that too many franchises overlook. And I think the Eagles may go back and revisit that 2014 plan and bring in some people just specifically to play special teams.
Hey, John, when we were talking about Michael Bennett a minute ago, did you see the thing about the the Patriots with their late deal, and what was your take on that, where the Patriots came in and tried to swoop in and sweeten the deal, and the Seahawks ultimately went with the Eagles deal anyway?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. Those are the two teams that generally do the most maneuvering, the two teams that played in the Super Bowl. Maybe there's something to that. So it doesn't surprise me that the Patriots are trying to add a good player, and they obviously need a ton of help on the front seven of that defense. So, but it was just the Eagles beating the Patriots again, and you know, it seems, if the report is true and there's a third-round pick involved, you have to ask yourself, why would the Seahawks accept the Eagles deal? Maybe they like Marcus Johnson more than most of us think. I don't know.
I thought the one narrative I saw,
again.
The one narrative that I saw said that if the Seahawks it was so late in the game that if the Seahawks had turned their back on that then the rest of the league would say, well, what are we going to deal with those guys for? Because they'll say you have a deal, but then they'll pull the rug out underneath you. Like they would lose their credibility with the rest of the league if they did a move like that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily buy that, because this is a league where, you know, we got a lot of that with the Sixers when Sam Hinkie was there, and that he was burning bridges with the way he did business. Maybe there's a little bit to it, but if you're in this league and somebody offers you a third-round pick, I mean, you just go, well, we got a better pick last minute. I don't know if it were that, if it was that. Maybe it was, but I find that hard to believe, because, again, nobody does more dealing than the Eagles and the Patriots. They're both well-versed in it. I ultimately think Seattle took the package they wanted, and maybe, as I said, maybe it has to do with Marcus Johnson. They need receiving help.
We're talking with John McMullen. Richard Sherman looked like he's going to be released. Jeremy Lane's going to be released. It looks like this Seahawks thing is falling apart out there. They're going to start over here. But on that trade, I guess you got to give Seattle a little bit. They were going to trade him, but essentially you get to that age and they're starting to rebuild, that the alternative was he was going to get cut. So for them to get something in return, I guess isn't a bad day for them.
No, again, they're in a different mode, and they have been. Their window was open, and they're a perfect example of what I was just talking about. They were even in a better position to build their roster, because not only did they hit on a rookie quarterback, but they hit on a rookie third-round quarterback. So for a number of years, they essentially paid Russell Wilson nothing. Then all of a sudden, he gets his extension. He's getting $22 million a year. And you've slowly seen the attrition as the years have gone by. And then you add to it that really good players, Hall of Fame level players, started aging and getting older, and that's what happens in this league. And at some point it ends, and we always talk about the mentality. It's better to give up a year too early than a year too late. And the Seahawks are moving on and trying to go to the next sort of phase and try to rebuild. I don't think there's ever – we see in this league all the time, they don't have to completely blow it up, but they do understand they have to get younger, and they have to move on from that Legion of Boom legendary defense, because it's getting older, and they need to sort of regroup and reload.
All right, plenty more on the NFL tomorrow. The draft, we'll start to dive into that a little bit. John's got his mock draft up right now on our website, 973ESPN.com. See who he has your favorite team taking in the first round. Who's number one? Who the Giants take at number two? John's mock draft now at 973ESPN.com. Thanks, John.
All right, thank you, guys.
All guests appear like John McMullen via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.